Good morning to you. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, be opening up to 2 Chronicles chapter 33. Segundo de Crónicas, capítulo 33. 2 Chronicles chapter 33. That's where we're going to find a beginning place for our study this morning. It's where we're going to spend a lot of time, is in 2 Chronicles 33 and 34. And so if you've got your Old Testaments, be opening up there, and you will be right where we need to be to get started. We have visitors this morning. We're thankful that you're here. And if you have a little while after services to stick around so that we can meet you and get to know you a little bit better, we certainly would appreciate that. And we'll be back together this evening to worship and study together at 5 o'clock. And if you're able to be back with us then, we would love to have you. If you are a college student that is here for UTSA, St. Mary, UIW, any of our other schools around, we're thankful that you're here. And at the end of services, you'll see a QR code on our screen with instructions for our college kids. If you'll just scan that and fill that out and mention that you're a college kid, we'd love to try to support you any way that we can this semester while you're here. But thank you especially for being here with us this morning, and good luck on a new school year. And it being a new school year for so many of us, I wanted us to look at an example of somebody who served God in their youth, and to use that as an example for ourselves today. And so we're going to be looking at the story of King Josiah this morning from 2 Chronicles chapter 33 and 34. So hopefully you're there already, and we can get a little bit of background for ourselves here about King Josiah. Chapter 33 in 2 Chronicles gives us the story of one of the most depressing time periods in the history of the southern kingdom of Judah, and that is the reign of a man called Manasseh. Manasseh is a man whose wickedness was hard to beat. Not only was he murderous, not only was he involved in human sacrifice and child sacrifice. To the Jewish mind, he was absolutely repugnant, as he would bring idols in and placed idols in the compound of the temple itself. And 2 Chronicles 33 gives an account of that. In fact, as you get towards the end of 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, it is stated a couple of different times that Judah is going to go off into Babylonian captivity. And the main reason given for them going off into captivity are the sins of Manasseh. Now, Manasseh is going to be a complicated figure, because at the very end of his life, he's going to have an epiphany. He's going to have one of those light bulb moments, and he's going to realize that the way that he had been leading and governing and just living was wicked, ungodly, and he needed to change. And so he becomes this redemptive hero. He's somebody who finds God or comes back to God at the end of his life. And there's something positive to be said for that. But it's hard in the span of a few years to undo what had taken decades to corrupt in the nation. And the nation of Judah is going to suffer because of how Manasseh led the nation for the time that he was in charge. This all becomes important because Manasseh is the grandfather of King Josiah. His father Amon is not much better. In fact, he's going to rule only for 2 years, and he is quickly deposed because of his wickedness. And that gets us then to the story of Josiah. It's Jesus who in Matthew chapter 5 says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do men light a lamp and put it under a basket, but they put it on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." As we seek to follow Jesus in our lives today, there are two qualities Jesus reveals here that need to be ours as we follow him. Number one is the fact that we must be light. In this phrase, Jesus would emphasize faith and righteousness to us, as these are really the themes of the Sermon on the Mount. How is it that we are the light of the world? By the manner in which we live, by the things we do, by the manner we live towards people around us, and by the manner we live towards God. So Jesus talks about our faith and our righteousness here. We must be light. And then, as you see at the end here in verse 16, not only must we be light, we must be light that is seen. And that almost sounds contradictory. How do you have a light that is not seen? But you have light that is not seen, and we're aware of that if we can remember some of the Bible songs that we sang as kids. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. And then everybody's favorite verse of the song, hide it under a bushel. No. And you, right? I'm going to let it shine. We recognize how it is that light can be hidden. If we place a basket over the candle, if we put our hand over the flashlight, we recognize how to keep light from shining. Not only must we be light, we must let our light be seen. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. It's not letting our light be seen so that we can be seen, but it's letting our light shine so that other people can see the God who is living in and through us. This calling that Jesus gives us in Matthew 5 transcends every scenario we can devise. In other words, this is how Jesus calls you and me to act every day of our lives. Every scenario in which we find ourselves, every episode of life into which we wander, this is how Jesus wants us to act. Whatever my background is, whatever my ethnicity is, whatever my age, we all have the potential to shine our lights in a way that glorifies God. And it's always at the beginning of a school year that we are provided an opportunity to think about this in a very clear way. School years tend to be opportunities to hit a reset button. We have an opportunity to be someone new, to be someone different, to refine parts of our character that might need it. So for students, how will we show God's glory by the manner in which we live? Or to those of us who are teachers, how will we be a light for our students and for those under whom we serve? And for us as parents, how will we support and encourage our students to be godly examples in a world that desperately wants them to be anything other than that? I would submit to you that it's in the life of Josiah that we can find some of these principles and we can find some guidance for ourselves. You look at Josiah's life, like we said, he was born surrounded by chaos and evil. He is the grandson of the wicked king Manasseh that we've just talked about. His father is a man named Amon. He is a man who is only going to serve as king for 2 years before there is an uprising that deposes him. About Josiah's father Amon, it is said in 2 Chronicles 33 and verse 22, better so benchidos, he did evil in the sight of the Lord as Manasseh his father had done, and Amon sacrificed to all the carved images which his father Manasseh had made, and he served them. Moreover, he did not humble himself before the Lord as his father Manasseh had done, but Amon multiplied guilt. And finally, his servants conspired against him and put him to death in his own house. But the people of the land killed all the conspirators against King Amon, and the people of the land made Josiah his son king in his place. You get a very fractious view here. You have servants in the house of Amon who seemingly because of his wickedness put him to death. But in verse 25, the people of the land then kill all the conspirators who seemingly have done a good thing, and they opt, the people of the land do, to put Josiah in charge. Now, we are going through an election process in our country right now, and maybe, just maybe, you're so frustrated with it that you're like, give me anyone else except for these two people. I have a 9-year-old daughter at home, and I have a 3-year-old daughter at home. Could I offer them as replacements? And you laugh for good reason. It's a ridiculous notion, isn't it? To have a 3-year-old or a 9-year-old sitting on the throne of a nation. But notice that's just exactly what the people of the land wanted. They killed all the conspirators who put Amon to death. Amon, who, by the way, deserved to die under the law of Moses. And they put Josiah as king in his place. And in chapter 34, capítulo 34, verso 1, chapter 34 and verse 1, Josiah becomes king when he is 8 years old. 8 years old. I don't know that you could get a much poorer commentary on Amon than this. His servants kill him. He is, number one, the son of Manasseh. He continues in all the wicked ways of Manasseh. He doesn't have any of the redeeming qualities of Manasseh. He just doubles down on the wickedness. He is so wicked, his own servants kill him. The people of the land rise up in revolt against those who kill him, and they opt to put his son into place. Is it because they think Josiah is going to do the same thing that Amon did? It seems like this would be a really good moment, talking about reset moments, to have a reset moment, except there is none. We're just going to continue doing the same thing we have done all along and thinking foolishly that change is going to happen, except this time change is going to happen, isn't it? You get a summary statement of the life of Josiah in chapter 34 and verse 2. Verso 2. He's going to reign 31 years in Jerusalem. He will be just shy of 40 years old when he dies. And in verse 2, Josiah did right in the sight of the Lord. Now, there's a refreshing commentary coming off of Manasseh and Amon. Josiah did right in the sight of the Lord. And he walked in the ways of his father David. And he did not turn aside to the right or to the left. So what can we learn from Josiah? What can anyone learn from an 8-year-old? Well, I think there are some significant lessons to learn. Number one, we learn that Josiah began to seek God at an early age. In fact, we're told as much. Verse 3. In the 8th year of his reign, so we'll put him around 15, 16, 17 years old, while he was still a youth, he began to seek the God of his father David. And in the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the Asherim, the carved images, and the molten images. He starts to seek God from an early age. He has this concerted effort to seek God at the age of 16. At the age of 20, he's going to engage in this campaign of national reform. Right? In the 12th year, so here he is at around 20 years old. This is still verse 3. He began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the Asherim, the carved images, the molten images. So all of these idols that Manasseh had brought in and that Amon had doubled down on, Josiah at 20 years old begins to tear them all down. They tore down the altars of the Baals in his presence, and in the incense altars that were high above them, he chopped down. Also the Asherim, the carved images, and the molten images, he broke in pieces and ground to powder and scattered it on the graves of those who would sacrifice to them. And then he burned the bones of the priests on their altars and purged Judah and Jerusalem. In the cities of Manasseh and Ephraim, Simeon, even as far as Naphtali, and their surrounding ruins, he also tore down the altars and beat the Asherim and the carved images into powder. Then he returned to Jerusalem, and in verse 8, in the 18th year of his reign, so here we are at about 26 years old, when he had purged the land and the house, he sent Shaphan, the son of Azaliah, and Maaseiah, an official of the city, and Joah, the son of Joahaz, the recorder, to repair the house of the Lord his God. So we've got a temple repair and reclamation project at the age of 26. That's a lot. That's a lot. What were you doing at 16? Tell you what I was doing at 16, I wasn't doing any of this. Right? I wasn't doing any of this. And I certainly wasn't engaging in national reform at the age of 20. I was doing good trying to pass astronomy. And I certainly didn't engage in the process of repairing the temple at age 26. But I want you to see something. You have this figure here in Josiah who is young, who by all accounts doesn't have a positive background out of which he's coming. He has possibly two really bad influences before him, and yet he does all of this good. Makes me wonder, we don't know a whole lot about Josiah's mama, do we? We know about his daddy. Amon seems to die, if you put together chapter 33 and chapter 34. Amon seems to die around the time that Josiah is 4 or 6. So you've got a period there where you've got the conspirators being put down, and you've got this intervening period where they're looking for a king, and finally Josiah gets to the throne. 4 or 6-year-old, somewhere around in there, Josiah is when his dad dies. Amon reigns for 2 years. And if Amon immediately takes over the throne upon the death of Manasseh, and there's no intervening time there, that means Josiah would have had 2 years around about with his grandfather Manasseh. And Manasseh is not just this Gentile, this wonderful creature by any means, but at the end of his life he does have this come to Jesus moment, and things change in his life, and that's good. He doesn't get anything from Amon. If he gets anything from Manasseh, it's 2 years that he spends with his grandfather. But even then, we don't know how quickly Manasseh repented. I wonder about his mom. Doesn't it make sense, though, that she would have a role in molding and shaping his heart here? Whoever it was, someone played an instructive role in the life of Josiah. Was it his mom? Was it one of the servants of the court? Was it a grandmother? Was it Manasseh in 2 years? I don't know. But there was somebody who came along and played an overwhelming role in the life of Josiah. Someone who raised him and influenced him in such a way that it could be said about him that he walked in the ways of his father David and did not turn to the right or to the left. And if you and I are learning anything from Josiah in these early formative years between the ages of 8 and 17, we learn that our age does not provide an excuse for us to neglect our service to God. Or put that another way, Josiah didn't allow his age to be an excuse, and neither did whomever was raising him. They saw capability in Josiah. At whatever age he was at, they saw capability. We learn that age doesn't hinder our ability to glorify God. We see Josiah on the throne at 8 years old glorifying God. We're going to see Daniel in his 90s glorifying God. We're going to see the Apostle John, most likely in his 90s, glorifying God in his old age. Age doesn't hinder our ability to glorify God. We might be serving in different ways and glorifying in different ways, but it doesn't hinder us from doing something, from being involved, from letting our light shine for His glory. Think about what we can learn from Josiah specifically if we're in that time frame. You know, do you remember being in school, being a young person, and feeling like everyone around you is involved in sinful activities? Just being overwhelmed by, if I'm going to be a Christian, this kind of seems overwhelming because literally, seemingly everyone else around me is doing what is wrong, and I have to be the weirdo who's going to do what's right? I have to stand up and say, I'm not going along with this, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. And here's where Josiah's example comes into play. Regardless of what everyone around us is doing, I can know what is right. And I can do what is right. Even when the crowd that is around me is doing what is wrong. When I simply determine in my heart to serve the Lord. That's what Josiah did. He determined in his heart to serve the Lord, and that's what he did. Now, most likely, none of us at our age, 8, 16, 20, 26, none of us are going to have to stand against an entire nation of people. We don't live in a nation with a national religion, but could you imagine at ages 20 and 26, fundamentally changing the national religion? And by the way, the national religion that your father and grandfather bowed the knee to, and now you're saying, guys, we're not going to do this anymore? But Josiah did that. Do you know how he got to the point that he could do that? He started early. If we are waiting until 16, or high school graduation, or college graduation, if we're waiting for those moments to decide, hey, now I'm going to get serious about serving God, let me tell you very candidly that that time is never going to come. If we convince ourselves that I just need to get a few more things straightened out, a few more things lined out, I just need to get to this point in my life, and then I'm going to get serious about serving God, that's not how this works. And that's not how I'm going to glorify God. And realistically, I'm never going to get to that point where I say, okay, now it's time to serve God. If we allow something to stand in the way, something's always going to be in the way. But if we decide now, whatever my age, if we just decide now, you know what, I may have put this off too long, I may have not taken my stand enough, I need to make a change, I'm going to start today. That's what Josiah did. He started and he continued. And what gave him the strength to continue was the fact that he made a decision. He made it early in his life. He made a decision, and then he followed through. Does anyone think, I know it's not until he's 16 that the text tells us in verse 3, he began to seek the God of his father David. Does anyone think that this all started at 16? That Josiah woke up one day, and by the way, he doesn't even have the law yet. They don't discover that for another 12 years. It's been tucked away somewhere. Who thinks that Josiah just woke up one morning, you know what? I think I'm going to serve God today. What 16-year-old who has not been interested in serving God up to that point wakes up one day and says, you know what? Even though I'm the king and I have the power to do whatever I want to whomever I want, you know what? I'm going to serve the God of heaven today. This started before 16, didn't it? Was it his mom? Was it his grandma? Was it an influential family member in his life? Was it a well-meaning, concerned servant in the house? Whatever it might be. There was an influence in the life of Josiah, and he started to serve God early. He was a light, wasn't he? We talked about that from Matthew 5. He was a light. He wasn't reflecting what was around him. Can you imagine what it would have been like if he was just reflecting whatever was around him in society? The people who had put him into power. Instead, he shines as a light, glorifying God, serving God. Think about Josiah a little bit later. Now he's 16 years old. And you look there at chapter 34, capítulo 34, verso 4, and he cuts off the opportunity to sin. This takes some maturity, right? He realizes the impetus for much of the sin in the nation is this idolatry. And so what does 16-year-old Josiah do? 16-year-old King Josiah goes around and starts destroying all of the idols in Judah. What his grandfather didn't do, what his father didn't do, he does. He wrecks these idols, and not only that, as you keep reading there in verses 4, 5, and 6, he grinds the pieces into powder and scatters it on the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. Can you imagine seeing these cemeteries where these bodies are buried and these monuments are adorned to all of these priests who worshiped at the high places, and then you go look at their grave, and on their grave is not some obelisk, not some great stone monument, but there's just powder from stones that had been used in idolatry. Josiah is doing what? He's sending a message. Here's a visual reminder. Here's where idolatry gets you. Nowhere good. And in fact, do you notice what verses 5 and 6 reveal in verse 5? He doesn't just destroy the idols. He goes and stops the ungodly influences. You know, if Manasseh or Amon had done this, how different the nation might have been, how different the course of the nation might have been. But in verse 5, he burns the bones of the priests on their altars and purged Judah and Jerusalem. He gets the priests out of the city. Those who were corrupting the people, he gets them out, he kills them, he burns their bones. There is no influence of them that is left in the nation. That's the campaign he started on. You want to know how to root out sin from your life? You find this sin in your life and you cut it out, which is exactly what Josiah does here. He finds the root cause and influence of the sin, and he sets about doing surgery. And he cuts it out. He burns it. He desecrates it. He completely separates it. And then verse 6, where does he go? He goes trotting up north. Right? He is king over Judah, the southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin. By this time, 722 BC has already happened. The northern kingdom's gone off into Assyrian captivity. There's just a little bit left here. But he's going to mosey on up into Manasseh and Ephraim and Simeon and Naphtali in verse 6. That's the northern kingdom, or what's left of the northern kingdom. He even goes up there and drives out the idolatry and the wickedness and the sin. You know, I look at Josiah in this period of his life. He lives the principle of Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 11. Here's a New Testament passage that speaks to us in our lives today. Paul, writing to the church at Ephesus, says in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 11, "Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but rather expose them." That's 100% what Josiah does here. There are no half measures with Josiah. There's no, I'm going to do just a little bit. If he's going to go in, Arkansas expression, he's going whole hog, right? He's completely in on this. There are no half measures. He was intent on a complete renovation of the land. But too often we're content with half measures. How do I know that? Did your mom ever tell you to clean your room? Of course she did. You had a good mom. She told you to clean your room, and what did you do? If you're like me, you took everything that was on the floor and you shoved it in the closet. And then with all of your might, pushed the closet door shut. Mom comes in, hey, the room's clean, I'm so proud of you. And then she opened the closet door. And in your mind, if your mind could communicate and control things, you're sitting there trying to use telepathy. Don't open the door, don't open the door. And she opens the door, and everything comes tumbling out. And your night and possibly your weekend is now ruined. Right? Half measures. We don't actually clean it up. We just give the appearance that we've cleaned it up. It's still dirty. It's still messy. It's still out of order. It's not what Josiah did, is it? He didn't hide it in the closet. He didn't hide it under the bed. He got to work getting rid of it. Somebody asked, I've got this sin in my life. I don't know how to get rid of it. What I am about to say should not minimize the fact that sin can get a hold of us, it can become habitual, and that there are addictions we need to break. I get that. But somebody says, hey, I've got this sin in my life, how do I get rid of it? Hey, have you tried just getting rid of it? I mean, seriously, have we tried to just get rid of it? Have we tried saying to ourselves, you know, self, this is not good. I should not do this. I recognize I should not do this. And so you know what? I'm going to make a concerted effort not to do this. That's what Josiah did. He got to the work of cutting it out and getting rid of it. I realize sin can get a hold of us sometimes. I realize we can be addicted to things. And I realize we need to find strategies to overcome that. And it's not always so easy as, hey, stop that. I get that. First time skiing in Colorado. The only time skiing in Colorado. And Audrey grew up skiing. This is my first and only time, and it turns out I had skis that were too long, and once we got that fixed, things got a lot better. But these first 3 days as I'm skiing with these long skis, my wife keeps telling me, don't cross your skis. Well, thanks. That's really helpful. I can't control anything else I'm doing here, but don't cross your skis. I appreciate it. I recognize it's not always that easy with sin. Can I submit sometimes it is, and we've just convinced ourselves otherwise? Or we just don't quite want to give it up yet? We've got to learn to take no half measures. There are some things in our lives that are sinful that we have the absolute capacity and power right now today to say, no more, I'm done. So let's be like Josiah and do that. Cut it out, drive it off, burn the bones, and start new. Josiah lived the principle. Don't have any association with the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. You know, there's this temptation in our lives. I think about when I was in school. There's always the temptation to stand too close to sin in order to fit in. No, I'm not necessarily going to do all the bad stuff. But I'm going to stand as close to it as I can. I mean, I don't want to seem like a complete oddball. I'm going to stand as close as I can to it. And I get why we would want that. Especially as a young person, I get why we would want that. But can I submit to you that's not the way to go? Here's what that leads to. That leads to blurring lines. It leads to compromise. That if I've stood here all along, right beside the line, what's the big deal if I step over it a little bit? Go a little bit more. Go a little bit more. We can't give in to the temptation to blur the lines, to compromise. What we have to be able to do is identify sin for what it is, and then remove as much opportunity to participate in the sin as I can. to separate myself from what tempts me, and to focus on being the light that God has called me to be. Now, you think about our role as parents. Think about our role as parents. This is one place where we are absolutely vital to the faith of our children. If we don't want our children to compromise, then what do our children need to see in us? A refusal to compromise. We can't rightfully, rationally expect our children to refuse to compromise on matters of sin if they see us compromising with sin day in and day out. We must teach our children to identify sin and temptation so they are not caught off guard. I recognize, look, I got a kid that's done public school. I get it, right? And more than that, I've got a kid that just lives in society, like you have kids that live in society. And questions come up. More questions than when I was a kid, right? More questions than when some of us were kids. What is this? Why are they doing that? What's this relationship? How do we? What's going on, Mom? What's going on, Dad? And I recognize we have to be very careful as parents what discussions we have at what ages. And I know not all kids are the same. I get that. But if we're not setting the groundwork to be able to talk to our kids about what sin is and how to avoid sin, and realizing that there really is something that is called sin and something that is called goodness and righteousness, and there's a difference between the two. If we're not helping our kids understand that, what are we helping our kids do? Hey, my kid can run in a track meet. My kid can hit a ball over a fence. My kid can kick a ball into a goal. My kid can play the piano. Yeah, but does your kid know what right and wrong is? Is your kid shining a light that points to God? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves as parents. And Gracious knows I want my kids to be as happy as anyone else's kids. I do. I want my kids to enjoy life. I want them to be happy. But if we're putting happiness before godliness, we are leading our families towards the same kind of destruction that Manasseh and Ammon led their families towards. Happiness and godliness don't have to come into conflict. But our understanding of happiness sometimes at 8 years old, 10 years old, 14 years old, 18 years old is very immature. Are we as parents willing to endure a little bit of disappointment on the parts of our children so that we can instruct them about what godliness really is? I remember having to have the conversation. I know the hair and the dad bod and all that. I used to be a pretty decent soccer player. Used to be. And I can remember tournament time rolled around, usually 2 tournaments every season. And every tournament we would have that 10 o'clock Sunday morning game. And I would have to have the conversation with my coach and with my teammates. Guys, I'm sorry I can't be there. Starting goalkeeper, by the way. Can't be there. And for a while it was the Mom and Dad say we got to go to church. You know what started happening around 15, 16, 17, 8 years old? Hey guys, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to church. It wasn't Mom and Dad anymore. It was me. This is what I believe. This is what I was convicted of. It's what I knew was right. But it started because there was that training when I was young. Training that was consistent. And realizing eventually that, you know what? What Mom and Dad were saying all along was right. They didn't tell me, Tyler, they didn't do this. Here's what my parents didn't do, and I'm so thankful they didn't do it. They didn't tell me, Tyler, God is important, your brethren are important, church is important. And then say, hey, you've got a game 10 o'clock on Sunday. Let's get to the game and we'll catch church that evening. My parents didn't do that. I'm thankful they didn't do that. My parents who tried to teach me not to compromise about my faith, I look to their example. I don't see that compromise, and I'm thankful for it. I've talked to friends who saw that compromise in their parents, and it caused them all sorts of confusion as they came up into maturity. Talked to one friend recently who said he sat down with his parents, 17, 18 years old. Mom, Dad, you said this is wrong. Why are we doing this? Out of the mouth of babes? We learn from Josiah we can be godly at a young age. We learn the importance of the role that we can play as parents. Then you look at Josiah when he's 28 years old. Here he is. He's humble before God. Josiah, here in 2 Chronicles 34, verso 14, verse 14. Here they are doing the work of repairing the temple, and they discover a book which apparently has been hidden away, lost. Seems to be, from the quotation that's given, seems to be the book of Deuteronomy, which would be much of the law of Moses, right? And Josiah's reaction upon finding the book of the law here is what? He tears his clothes. It's a sign of great humility. Here's the king. Here's the one with all of the power, all of the influence. He tears his clothes. He humbles himself. And then he hears the law and what the law says. And he obeys it. They inquire about the law beginning in verse 22. And in verse 23, Hilkiah the prophetess, Huldah the prophetess, says in verse 23, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, tell the man who sent you to me, thus says the Lord, behold, I am bringing evil on this place and on its inhabitants, even all the curses written in the book. That's Deuteronomy 30. The blessings and the cursings, go read that sometime if you want to. Verse 26, verso 26, but to the king of Judah who sent you to inquire of the Lord, thus you will say to him, thus says the Lord God of Israel regarding the words which you have heard, because your heart was tender and you humbled yourself before God when you heard his words against this place and against its inhabitants, and because you humbled yourself before me, tore your clothes and wept before me, I truly have heard you. Here's a man who humbled himself before God, who heard what God's will was, and who did it. He listened to the words of God, and he did them. And then look at verse 30. Or verse 29, better so, banting the waving. Then the king sent and gathered all the elders of Judah in Jerusalem, and the king went up to the house of the Lord, and all the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the priests, the Levites, and all the people from the greatest to the least. And he, verse 30, he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant which was found in the house of the Lord. Who read it? This is not Ezra the priest reading it. This is not a prophet reading it. This is not one of the Levites reading it. Who stands up and reads from the law in front of all of these people? Josiah. He humbled himself before God. He heard the words of God. He did the words of God. And he tried to influence everyone else around him. The same Josiah that tore down altars is the same Josiah that publicly read Scripture and tried to turn people's hearts back to God. And so look at verse 33. You ever wonder as a parent if you're doing any good? And some days you think, hey, I'm doing pretty good at this. I got this thing down. And then you have other days where reality slaps you upside the face. And you're like, I have literally no clue what I'm doing. And my kids are heathens. Right? We have all felt that way before at some point, those of us who have kids. Somebody, yes, make me feel better. Kara, don't you say no. Make me feel better. And then we think back to when we were kids and our parents taught us, and we realize the good things that our parents might have taught us. And we realize how even though they taught us good things, sometimes as kids, we didn't do what they said, even though we knew it was right. We didn't do it because we wanted to do whatever we wanted to do, and we learned very quickly, hopefully, hey, we don't do that. We do what Mom and Dad say. We do what is right. Here's Josiah. Kent said in his talk up here a few weeks ago in our question and answer night, he reminded us all, prodigals do come home. You never know what kind of a lesson you're going to teach, what kind of wisdom you're going to impart that's going to, as we're thinking about our families this morning, reach our kids, resonate with our kids. But look at Josiah here in verse 33. He's done all of this good work. He removed all the abominations from all the lands belonging to the sons of Israel and made all who were present in Israel to serve the Lord their God. And then notice this last sentence. Throughout his lifetime, they did not turn from following the Lord God of their fathers. The lessons that we're willing to teach early on in the lives of those around us can resonate later in life. And it did here. They served God all the years of Josiah's life. He read to them from the book of the law. He read to them from Deuteronomy, where God set before the people death and life, blessing and cursing, and he encouraged the people to do what? Choose life. What we see in Josiah are the very teachings of Jesus that you and I encounter today. The challenge to let our light shine. The challenge to let our lights shine before others. The challenge to hear the words of God and to do them. The challenge to choose life instead of death. If you look at your life this morning and you've never come to Jesus Christ, you're separated from hope, you're separated from peace, you're separated from forgiveness. But in a moment, that can change this morning. If you'll hear the words of God as we've studied them this morning, if you'll confess Jesus as your King, if you'll turn from sin, if you'll unite with Jesus in baptism and raised to walk a new life, you can have peace, you can have hope, you can have comfort, you can have forgiveness. You can have a place in the family of God. Maybe as a Christian you look at your life and you have not been following the Lord like you should. Here's your opportunity this morning. If we can pray with you and pray for you, if we can support you, if we can encourage you in any way, won't you choose now while we stand and while we sing?